Hello and welcome to Pock and Rob. This week's video I'm going to be continuing my series of anniversaries. Every single album you're going to see on my list today turns 40 this year. They were all released in the year 1983. Before I go into my list, I just remind you to click the subscribe button if you've not already done so. Hit the thumbs up to like the video and click the bell to receive notifications of future content. So in at number 15 is Bob Dylan with Infidels. This is the album released after his trilogy of Christian records that consisted of Slow Train Coming, Saved and Shot of Love. But there's still an awful lot of biblical imagery in this record. And actually, having never really listened to Infidels, despite liking Bob Dylan for over 30 years, I found this a really engaging listen in the last few days. And it's, as a result, just snuck up from outside of the top 20 that I actually had and made its way to number 15, booting something off the list, which happened to be Punch the Clock by Elvis Costello and the Attractions. I think Infidels is a fine record. Its best known track is probably Joker Man, and actually that was probably the track that engaged me the least out of all of them. I enjoyed the other 7 tracks on the record far more, things like I and I and Neighborhood Bully. So 15, Infidels by Bob Dylan. And number 14 is an album I've liked for years. It's Sports by Huey Lewis and the News. Their best-selling record in the States, although over in the UK I think their best-selling is actually 4, given that 4 came off the back of the success of The Power of Love. Sports is a really solid record. So things like Heart of Rock and Roll, Bad is Bad, I Want a New Drug. It's a really, really good barroom pop record. My number 14. At number 13, I have placed the debut album from Tears for Fears, The Hurting. This is quite a difficult listen at times, but it contains some of Tears for Fears' greatest songs, things like Mad World and Pale Shelter and Change. It's actually going to be re-released very shortly in a 40th anniversary edition that was announced just a few weeks ago. Tears for Fears, The Hurting, at number 13. At number 12, I've placed a covers record. Now, I'm not a massive fan of covers albums generally. They have to have something exceptional about them. Things like Moondog Matinee by the band, Famous Blue Raincoat, all Leonard Cohen covers by Jennifer Warnes, or maybe even the thing I covered in my last video last week, which was Run Devil Run by McCartney. But this is a thoroughly enjoyable album. It's Tracy Ullman's You Broke My Heart in 17 Places. The title track of the album is the one song on here that isn't a cover. It was written by Kirsty MacColl. You can hear Kirsty MacColl's backing vocals on it. I'd love to hear her demo. That to my knowledge, that's never been released. But the title track is terrific. But the rest of the songs on here are all covers. It contains 3 full-on top 10 hits, which were Breakaway, her debut single, the number 2 hit, They Don't Know, which is again a Kirsty MacColl song, and the cover of Doris Day's Move Over Darling. It also contains stuff like Life is a Rock But the Radio Rolled Me, and a really good cover version of Blondie's I'm Always Touched by Your Presence, Dear. It kind of sank without Trace, which is a shame, because this is a superior 60s girl pop cover collection, in effect. Tracy Ullman's You Broke My Heart in 17 Places at number 12. At number 11, I have placed the Eurythmics with Touch. Now, the Eurythmics had 2 albums come out in 1983. Sweet Dreams, which I have to admit I've never listened to. Otherwise, perhaps it would make this list. But then they released Touch. And generally, it is accepted that Touch might be their strongest ever record. Given how quickly this was recorded and released, it's a surprise just how good it is. So Here Comes the Rain Again, Right By Your Side, and Who's That Girl were massive hits off this record. But the rest of the album hangs together really well. Touch represented the Eurythmics on the up, and in my opinion, they probably didn't reach these heights ever again. Touch at number 11. Number 10 is the band that appears in my videos and almost no one else's, Bucks Fizz, and this is Hand Cut, their 3rd record. So coming off the back of the success, the top 10 album success that was Are You Ready? Coupled with 2 number 1 singles and another top 10 single. Their follow-up was Hand Cut. Now, Hand Cut contains a Cut If You Can't Stand the Heat and Run For Your Life, which are both superior singles. That was all they released from this album originally, although You Love Love came out in about 1989. I always have a soft spot in my affections for Bucks Fizz, and for me, Hand Cut is a solid top 10 album. And number 9 is an album that has been growing on me of late. I did a video about this about 6 months ago. Pipes of Peace by Paul McCartney. Now, this gets a lot of flack, gets a lot of criticism as being nowhere near as good as Tug of War, and it isn't. But it does contain its title track, which is one of his very best singles ever, in my opinion. And Through Our Love, that closes the album, which is absolutely top draw, deep cut album McCartney territory. I used to rag on this album for The Other Me and the lyrics of dustbin lid being rhymed with did. And yet that's become better as I've understood what he was playing at with the lyrics. Side 1 of Pipes of Peace is actually starting to really grow my affections, and even the lesser tracks on side 2, I like it. I like the record. It's not a favourite, but it is my number 9 from 1983. And I didn't even mention Say, 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 because as you possibly know from the previous video, I'm not that fond of the song. Pipes of Peace, number 9. Number 8 is another record that is definitely not my favourite by this artist, but I have a good time every time I put it on. I think maybe commerciality has dimmed the album a little bit given how many singles were released, and it's Billy Joel's An Innocent Man. Contains the number 1 hit, Uptown Girl, the absolutely fantastic Innocent Man title track, Easy Money, Christy Lee, Keeping the Faith. There's so many really good songs on here, and yet perhaps the album just doesn't quite hang together. It's a tribute to all of the 60s artists and 50s artists you grew up to. For example, Innocent Man is a pastiche of Ben E. King. Really, really good songwriting. Like I say, it's probably the most accessible of Billy Joel's albums, but it's not the best. Number 8, An Innocent Man. And number 7, I have placed The Amazing Kamikaze Syndrome by Slade. Once again, not my favourite Slade album, but this does contain My Oh My and Run Run Away, which were 2 major hit singles. The first time they'd had back-to-back top 10 hits since 1974, I believe. And the other music on this album is really pretty good too. And the other tracks from the album, things like Sailor V and Cocky Rock Boys and Cheap and Nasty Love and In the Doghouse and Slam the Hammer Down. It's a really, really good album. Amazing Kamikaze Syndrome at number 7. At number 6, I placed Water Sign by Chris Rea. So after 4 albums that hadn't really taken off, despite the success of Fool If You Think It's Over from the very first one of these, he was on the verge of being dropped. He recorded some demos, gave them to his record company, and they liked them so much they released them as is as the album Water Sign. This saved his career and started his climb to the ascendancy that we got when we got Road to Hell. This contains probably one of my all-time favourite Chris Rea tracks, which is Candles. I love I Can Hear Your Heartbeat, love Strange Ways, Nothing's Happening by the Sea, Texas. It's a really solid album. Water Sign at number 6. At number 5, I placed The Rise and Fall by Madness. This contains Our House and Tomorrow's Just Another Day, both of which were huge hits. It's the first album after the Complete Madness compilation, and for me, it is Madness's most complete album. So whether or not it's a concept album about youth and growing up is debatable, given the fact that Mike Barson apparently didn't get the memo about that one. But there's stuff like on here like Blue Skin Beast and Mr. Speaker Gets the Word, Madness Is All in the Mind, and the title track. And I do think it's Madness's best album. And this is the last one on this list that will be my favourite record by the artist that I end up talking about. In fact, given the fact that only this, Touch, You Broke My Heart in 17 Places, and probably The Hurting are my favourites by the artists that are on this list, this tells me that although there's much that I love and really enjoy in 1983, it's not my best year for music. But there's so much that is great. Rise and Fall, number 5. And number 4 is an album that I think the first 5 tracks are truly phenomenal, and then the next 4 are meh. It's Peace of Mind by Iron Maiden. So those first 5 tracks are Where Eagles Dare, Revelations, Flight of Icarus, Die With Your Boots On, and then The Trooper. And perhaps it's the fact that the start of side 2 is The Trooper and is so overshadows the whole of side 2 that I just don't enjoy side 2 anywhere near as much after that. That said, those first 5 tracks alone are what gets it this high placing at number 4. Peace of Mind by Iron Maiden. At number 3, I have placed the debut by REM, which is Murmur. I actually talked about this album on my top 15 debut albums. This has got Radio Free Europe on it, and Talk About the Passion, West of the Fields. It's a really fine album. Again, not my favourite by the artist. That will come probably as either Automatic for the People or Reckoning, or maybe Life Switch Pageant or Green. So many better albums than Murmur, but Murmur is still a really good album. My number 3. And number 2, I have placed War by U2. Again, not my favourite U2 album. That is almost certainly Achtung Baby. However, I do think this is the closest that U2 have ever got to a perfect album. There is not a track on this that I think I would ever skip or not want to listen to. Sunday Bloody Sunday, Seconds, New Year's Day, Drowning Man, 40, the one based on Psalm 40, The Refugee, Two Hearts Beat as One. I think War is... It's what... This took off. War properly took off with New Year's Day hitting the top 10. And they became the biggest band on the planet afterwards. But War, possibly their most perfect album. I've placed that at number 2. At number 1, I have placed the only album on this list that made my top 15 albums of the 1980s. I placed it at number 5 in the 80s, and it's Hand of Kindness by Richard Thompson. I was telling a little porky when I said that The Rise and Fall was the last on this list that was my favourite by the artist, because this is my favourite solo Richard Thompson recording. This contains Tear-Stained Letter, which opens the record, The Wrong Heartbeat, Both Ends Burning, Devonside, an achingly beautiful song, the title track, and Two Left Feet. And it's an excellent mix of the achingly sad and the comedically fun. It's the first album he released following the split from Linda Thompson, and this is why I was telling a slight porky, because actually the work with with Linda is, and this is why I said I'm telling a slight porky, because it's my favourite solo Richard Thompson record, but the Richard and Linda Thompson records of Shoot Out the Lights, which is my second most favourite album of all time and my best album of the 80s, and I Want to See the Bright Lights Tonight, are better records than Hand of Kindness. But Hand of Kindness is my number 1 album from 1983. So that concludes my top 15 albums of the year 1983. What would you be including? Please do let me know in the comments below. I'll be back in a week with another video. Before then, I just remind you to subscribe, like, and hit the bell. And thanks for watching.